gentleness, firmness, fluidity, power, harmony, wisdom, concentration, serenity. Martial arts are these and much more. Martial arts, the way of the warrior. As a sport, as a way of life, as performance, the arts and warrior disciplines have captured the attention of human beings since the beginning of time. Both in the Oriental as well as in Western cultures, the arts of the god Mars have accomplished an assignment in the history of mankind that cannot be substituted. The caste of warriors dedicated to maintaining the security of group was converted into the militia, the militaries, creating our modern armies. Nevertheless, that spirit originally came from the first wizards, medicine men, those individuals, specially skilled men of the group who adapted a natural position as leaders because of their physical and mental capacities. Those types of men who were initiated into the training formulas that constantly pushed them to overcome themselves were never lost. Japan. It is the last day of the year. Master Kodo Murakami is practicing carrying out purification rites, and his disciples are helping him. These are engineers, lawyers, university professors, craftsmen, and all types among them. Nevertheless, all of them, Shugendo monks, practice ancient rites and forms of training that connect them with what is mysterious. Shintoism, primal animism, fusion with the first and the last truth. They are purified by extreme heat and cold. The Shugendo ceremonies are the door to deep, intense truth and lasting perception, another level of consciousness and reality that is not found in everyday life. Martial arts is a way of connecting with reality, a unification path between the body, the emotion, and the mind, a way of connecting us with what is everlasting. Master Swajushi Akeshi is preparing for the Dochuyu test. For 10 days he will remain buried in a hole where there is not any space to lie down. He will remain standing or sitting, and in complete darkness and silence. He has to control his mind, his anguish, his hunger, his coldness, to concentrate on the meditation practices which his master has initiated him. Breaking all ties with his habitual sensorial references, all that helps him to maintain live description of the world will sink, leaving a space for his essential ego that has disregarded tensions, fleeting desires, and illusions. If Master Tsujoshi, Grand Master of Iaido, the art of Japanese sword, is capable of stopping his mind, then his imperishable ego will come forth and take charge of the situation. If not, he will remain confined in the hole from which he will not be able to come out by his own means. The first days were terrible. My mind just drifted away and I lost the notion of time, of what was real and imaginary. I was desperate. I sang, I cried, I screamed. On the third day, I was more or less lost. That is when I remembered the exercises my master had told me to do. I did them with all my energy and abandonment. My aim was fixed. I did not have anything to lose. I flooded myself with deep peace, and I felt a heat that would be with me until the moment I left the hole. This experience changed my life and my martial art. There is no more fear. I appreciate the beauty of each moment. We are very privileged human beings, but we do not know it. But not everything in martial arts is a path of asceticism. As a sport, martial arts have conquered the hearts of the youth. Millions of them practice karate, judo, and taekwondo. The three of them are recognized as Olympic sports. The last one, paradoxically, is the most popular one worldwide. The person responsible for this recognition by the International Olympic Committee has been a Spanish man, Antonio Espinos, president of the World Karate Federation. Karate is a sport, but I have always said that it is a martial art and that it is impossible to separate both phases. The two phases are of the same thing. It is a sport aspect that has served for karate to be known in the whole world, but martial art is the essence of karate. But what is definitely clear is that the person who practices karate is better than they were before practicing it. If it were not for sports and the incredible development karate has had during the last 40 years in the whole world, martial arts would not have the means, nor would it have become so well known as it has at this moment. All katas begin with a defensive movement. This means that karate is totally opposed to violence. But within the pride and knowledge of the individual who only responds when he is attacked. Karate is one of the most popular sports in the world. It is practiced in more than 160 countries, and there are more than 10 million affiliated to the International Federation and World Federation. We estimate that there are 40 to 50 million practitioners in the whole world. The conditions needed to be recognized as an Olympic sport have been met. The International Olympic Committee has recognized the International Karate Federation in June 1999. And now it can be said that karate has met all the requirements, therefore making it an Olympic sport. Many millions, and I mean millions, children and youths who are now on the streets without anything else to do, exposed to the dangers of drugs and delinquency, instead of being on the streets, could go to the gymnasiums where they could have access to the practice of karate. That is the true mission, the objective behind the idea of the Olympics in karate. The sport aspect has been a Korean tradition, mainly led by Taekwondo. It is a sport that has taken advantage of the widespread in the West, and it has been included as a sport in some Olympic Games. But the Korean tradition is not only Taekwondo. In fact, Taekwondo is the part of the warrior's arts of this country, that which is related to strikes and kicks. To a certain extent, in its origin, it took on the Japanese model of karate, which is a similar formulation. Presently, the World Taekwondo Federation is divided into two organizations. The World Taekwondo Federation, recognized by the International Olympic Committee, and the International Taekwondo Federation, even today, directed by the creator of the style, General Choi Hun-ji. Even though the movements are similar to those of karate, more emphasis is put on the use of the legs. We can say it is an art dominated by the centrifugal force. Meanwhile, karate is dominated by the centripetal force. The tendency is for the movements to be more open. The positions are higher, and its expansive and ascending techniques get to a level where they are truly spectacular. The Taipon team is the maximum expression of the exhibition teams of this martial art, showing the incredible feats on the stage. But the origin of these arts is based on formulations that are much wider and complex, which includes weapons, throws, and locks. The two most important schools or styles are the Hwa Rang Do, which is the martial art that is done by the cream of the gentlemen of the Korean palace. And the Hapkido is an art that is somewhat similar to the Japanese Aikido. The enemy must move around the defender, breaking the attack lines with decisive actions that take advantage of the attacking forces of his opponent. In the United States, karate as a sport gained spectacular reputations through Mike Anderson, the creator of Full Contact.
I think sports are extremely important to the martial arts. There's an old expression that goes, you can't swim until you jump into the water. By the same token, you can't fight unless you really fight. So how do you practice your martial art techniques? You can't go out and start a street fight every 2 or 3 days. So the best way to learn how to apply these techniques effectively is through the sport, by fighting another person in the ring, in a tournament, or even in the school. This is how you learn how to fight, by fighting. If you practice all these techniques you learn in the mirror every night and never once had any contact with someone, you would never be an effective fighter. The only way to become an effective fighter is to actually fight.
But nowadays, martial arts accomplish a multiple social function. And this goes from the historical formation of security corps to educationals. The work done by martial arts instructors is not sufficiently recognized by modern society. Nevertheless, factors such as citizen insecurity have contributed to the rebirth of interest in these practices. Personal safety is without doubt one of the main reasons that pushes the neophyte to be initiated in the practicing of martial arts. In these scenes shot on the streets of Geneva, Italy, Kung Fu master Paolo Cangelosi shows us how martial arts training prepares the individual when facing dangerous situations. Efficiency. The search for a perfection and invincible technique has always constantly urged masters to develop their arts. In Japan, at the beginning of the 20th century, Jigoro Kano established, based on the old Jiu-Jitsu school, a philosophy of action that can be summarized in a word, Judo. Judo literally means the way of gentleness. How can you confront force without force? Kano established conceptual limits that made facing an opponent an act of intelligence, which brought about the famous maxim, maximum efficiency with minimum effort. Kano discovered this principle by observing nature in his retreat in the Buddhist monastery of Eoshoji. There, while meditating, he saw how a bamboo survived yielding to the weight of the snow opposed to the branches of a tree that was much stronger, like the oak tree, which broke under the weight. That is how he established the principle of Judo. If they push, you yield. If they pull, you advance. The traditional Japanese of Jiu-Jitsu has been very rich and inspiring for fighters. Even many years later, during the decade of the 90s, once again, they went back to that idea as a revolution in the world of combat arts. Traditional Japanese had arrived to the north of Brazil with the noble Japanese Count Kama. Because of his gratefulness, Count Kama taught the members of the Gracie family the technique of the gentle art, which his family had maintained as a secret for generations. The result was the creation of the most famous world saga of fighters of our times, the Gracie family.
In the early 1900s, a former Japanese champion went to Brazil, ahead of the Japanese immigration colony. My grandfather was a politician and a very influential man at the time, helped the Japanese champion get established in Brazil. And then to show his gratitude, he started teaching the traditional jiu-jitsu to my uncle Carlos. My uncle, after learning the techniques of the traditional jiu-jitsu, passed on to his brothers. And my father, who was the youngest of the five brothers, became the most proficient of all. He then eventually became a national champion in Brazil, and through what we call the Gracie Challenge, started challenging different styles of martial arts to show the superiority of jiu-jitsu against other styles of martial arts.
Rorion Gracie is the visible head of the generation of the family, who immigrated to the United States and who in California created, along with the director of Conan, John Milius, a performance that broke through the existing prejudices held up to the moment about fighting. They did this by creating the ultimate fighting championship, Combats Without Rule. In those combats, he demonstrated that his system was more effective than any other, thereby defeating all the other fighters who fought against his brother Royce. This incredible success brought down many of the preconceived ideas about the type of fighting that existed at that time, and the Gracies opened up a new way of looking at combat. My family and myself are challenging Mike Tyson because people all over the world think that Mike Tyson is the best fighter. No, he is the best boxer, not the best fighter. That is something else, and I'm preparing to demonstrate it. 50 years ago, my father challenged Joe Louis, who was a heavyweight champion at that time. Joe Louis did not accept. Now I am challenging Mike Tyson, and I hope he accepts. Nevertheless, in spite of the great impact that forecast the end of traditional arts, instead of decreasing, they have increased. It would not be like before. The great word was efficiency, and in front of the new golden idol, the rest bend their knees. Traditional forms that come from China, like Wing Chun, that focus on the concept of real fighting, gained more importance. In fact, the famous Bruce Lee studied Wing Chun while in Hong Kong with the mythical Chip Man. One of the last students, and without doubt the most famous, was Leung Ting.
The Wing Chun system is a system that we use our practical technique to fight against force, or better say, we fight against the most powerful enemies. You got to understand, okay, we are not bull, we are not gorilla, we don't use brute force to fight against our enemy. And unfortunately, always our enemy, they are much powerful and they are much stronger than us. So this is why the Wing Chun way is to teach you to use some special kind of technique to overcome the brute force of our enemies. But Wing Chun, we teach people to do it freely, because once if you face some people in the street, you never know which style he learned. You can never ask him, okay, since you learn Judo, I have never practiced how to fight against Judo, I'm not going to fight with you. This is impossible, right? So this is why in Wing Chun, we develop a special way. We call it Chi Sao. Chi Sao is some kind of training, some kind of exercise that we only depend on our own feeling. When some people hit me, when some people attack me, okay, just when I see how he comes, and I stretch my arms away, when my arms are out, so then I touch his arms, and then I can move. I can react according to how he wants to move.
One of the great masters of this art, and much admired, is Victor Gutierrez. He was educated in Germany. This young man from Leon, Spain, has caused an impact on the international scene with his video on combat arts. His approach to education makes him constantly reconsider the most efficient way of facing difficult situations. There are other traditions less well known that have also broken into the combat art scene. There are styles that come from cultural environments which are very diverse, such as Hawaii or the Philippines. They have caused both experts and students to be interested in them. The rich tradition of Spanish fencing, now lost or used in Europe, has nevertheless been preserved in a cultural atmosphere very far and distant, the Philippines. Mauricio Maltesi is one of the most important top experts on Southeast Asiatic martial arts. He has worked on different projects in the fields, collecting traditional styles which were almost lost. He has had the ability to revive and even teach them. Some are like tools for anthropologists to enable them penetrate into the cultural aspect, something difficult to learn about if you are not connected with martial arts practices. These martial arts, the arts from the Philippines, contribute great novelties because they are fusions between the Orient and the West. In the Philippine Islands, among the different arts that have been developed on the archipelago, we can find martial arts known by the names of Arnis-Eskrima or Kali. The two first ones, especially Arnis de Mano, makes you immediately think of an origin that is Latin. Arnis could be the result of the confused Latin terminology armis, that means weapon. The secret societies, and that is what I mean, secret, have never made the martial widespread of techniques. It is just only in the last few years I have been allowed to penetrate into these societies which, as it is well known, do not have, let us say, good relationships with the law. In fact, at the beginning of the past centuries, these societies even reached a point where they substituted the central power of many areas of the south of Italy. In other words, at times they completely took over the normal power which had been established publicly. Therefore, by observing these techniques, it is clear that there was a close relationship among these styles and those other ones that existed on the Philippines, especially in the north of the archipelago. The Philippine styles are a mixture of tradition fused together because of many invasions. The Latosa-Eskrima, in other words, the fencing of the Latosa family, is one of the most outstanding forms of Philippine combat. They immigrated to the United States, and after various generations of maintaining their art as a secret, their family have begun to make it public during the last few decades.
You know, as you look back and you take a global picture of what the historic translation of the Filipino arts are, is you have a fighting system that was here, and then it went into an artistic mode where they had to hide the arts from the various people who have taken over the islands, and then back out into a form of Eskrima or Arnis or Kali, whatever you want to call it. So you have coming from a fighting mode into an artistic mode to hide it and back out. So the influences of the hidden part of it may come out of dances, may come out of some folk plays, and then you get the flower influences and the fancy movement influences here, you know, and where within this flowery, this flower influence or this fancy influence is what's the substance of it all. And the substance is the fighting method, because it's a martial system. It comes from martial, then it goes to an artistic sort of mode, and now it's here.
In the Latosa family, fencing, as in many of the old arts that are appearing nowadays on the international scene of martial arts, what is essential is not the accumulation of technical resources, but in fact, much more on the contrary. It is a control of the concept, the great lines of ideas referring to the confrontation between the opponents. This new encounter with the lost European tradition suffered seriously the day Bill Newman, an Englishman, met Rene Latosa.
If you can use a sword, if you can have the muscle memory, if you can have the feeling of this sword, transfer this feeling back into the stick. We teach swords so that people can do sticks properly. We don't teach sticks so that people can do swords. But I don't teach medieval so that people can do Latosa-Eskrima. I teach Latosa-Eskrima so they can do the medieval. The reason that I use the weapons is only to illustrate how good Latosa-Eskrima is, not to teach them to do medieval. It's a part of Latosa-Eskrima, and an extremely small part.
Bill was very close to the Tower of London. At that time, he had really a fabulous intention weapon to revise the European tradition. From that moment on, together with his student Steve Tappan, they brought new life to hundreds of traditions almost forgotten in the United Kingdom, such as making armors or swords for real combat. Some of these arts, more or less exotic, are becoming more interesting among those who study a lot in the world of martial arts. Arts like the Polynesian, Lima Lama, Hawaiian styles such as Lure of Grandmaster Solomon Kaueewalo, or Philippine forms like Arnis Master Tansinko, or Arnis Corredas of Master Bersabal, or the Indonesian Pentjak Silat, etc., or Muay Thai, have ended up penetrating a market which was too centered up to the moment on Japanese styles. The martial traditions of the ancient kingdom of Siam are cultural treasures that have always formed part of the interests protected by the ruling class of the country as well as by the people. There are two periods that stand out in terms of the development of the martial arts we are referring to. The first one is characterized for its combat without the use of protections. Those power contenders, prize fighters, used to use cotton ropes to wrap their hands, rolling them up in such a complex way that above all, they serve to make the strike much more devastating. Secondly, we have the present Thai boxing, using the English terminology of Thai boxing. They use the ring, and it is originally from boxing and is common among all combat sports. They use gloves with different weights depending on the type of athletes. A series of strikes are allowed, and many of the offensive actions are much more limited with respect to those used in Muay Thai Boran. Nevertheless, we can say, even though this type of sport is extremely energetic and violent, there is a very strict code, and possible problems nowadays in the ring are very rare. There is something in common among these styles, even though they are very different. We are referring to their open way of focusing, their capacity to incorporate all that is valid and effective, and precisely that is the characteristic that defines many modern martial arts. This new form of cross-training invites the student to take the best of each style, adapting it to his physical and temperamental characteristics. Bruce Lee defined it perfectly in his famous slogan, "Take what functions and get rid of the superficial." A philosophy that was various years ahead of the future tendency was another of his famous sentences. Art is what is at service to the artist, and not the artist at service to art. This open and reformist attitude had a special echo in the United States of America due to its peculiar cultural uprooting. The father of this revolution was Grand Master Adriano Imperato, the creator of Kajukenbo. At age 83, and after several heart operations, Master Imperato still continues to teach his peculiar art, which extended all over the world.
Yeah, my style is different. It's freehand, boom, 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 combination technique. When I say the guy is down, follow up. Don't let him get up. If he moves, he's still alive yet. If my student want to learn another type of form or technique, that I always tell my student, if you figure you want to learn something to develop yourself and to improve yourself, go with my blessing. But don't forget your family tree, where your roots are, right here.
These lines in favor of combat efficiency, also called external, overlapped their success during the last 100 years of internal focus, whose focus was directed to the development, recuperation, and maintenance of health. Tai Chi has been one of the most extended and best-known forms of these martial arts. The Beat generation was fascinated during the 70s with the demonstration of the power of Chi, the internal energy that Grandmaster Chen Man-chin used to show in California. There are two great schools of Tai Chi, the Chen and the Yang. Both base their practice on the forms. The forms are a chain of pre-established movements with special rhythmic and energetic flow. It generally represents a combat against one or various virtual enemies. The forms, kata in Japanese, are present in almost all of the Oriental styles, and its functions is not only to develop the technique of the student or facilitate the memorization of the main movements. Through this practice, the energetic circulation of the body is activated, and the student goes into a state of extraordinary concentration. It is said that other Oriental combat arts, komute or randori in Japanese, are combined with the practice of the forms, and in Tai Chi these forms become the center of focus. The most important Chinese master, the great-great-grandson of the creator of the Yang style, is Master Fu Jingzhen. His family preserved, come hell or high water, the tradition of some forms that without doubt have been converted into the most popular Chinese martial arts. But Shaolin is the cradle of the Oriental arts. These images were taken by the Western monk Huang Aguilar on the 1500th anniversary of the famous temple. They show us the richness of the most popular art of the Oriental monasteries. Shaolin became very famous through the Kung Fu series starring David Carradine in the famous role of the Little Grasshopper. Up to the moment, it has been the most famous martial arts series on television. The original idea of that series, although many people do not know it, was from Bruce Lee himself. The producer did not want to use an Oriental actor in the star role, so Bruce Lee was left aside. That was after that great success when the Chinese government somewhat opened up the censorship that it had on traditional martial arts, of course, with the idea of receiving more dollars from tourism. Also, the internal line of the monastery took advantage of the occasion to perpetuate the warrior tradition of the temple, a peculiar combination of Buddhism and martial arts. The hierarchy of the temple has supported and specifically authorized Huang Aguilar to spread the true art of Shaolin beyond the folkloric or performances and through his Shaolin audio-visual encyclopedia. It is a beautiful paradox that explains a lot of the things that are happening nowadays with martial arts on the global village. A young man who lives in the Basque region in Spain is given the authority to preserve 1,000-year-old Chinese art. Other Oriental masters have received the same weighty responsibility. Master Congelosi controls some of the secret Chinese forms that have been transmitted to him by his masters. Styles such as the Hungar or the Pakwa have started becoming essential in the last few years. In these images, we see Master Congelosi doing the Pavmen Chun within the sacred circle of fire. There are soft forms whose movements nevertheless hide the very difficult combat application. In the center of Geneva is where the walls of an ancient Catholic monastery now enclose the school where a master of traditional Oriental arts teaches his Oriental students the secret of Kung Fu. Master Congelosi is working on a television series in which they go deeply into the part of China close to the West. His mastery of Kung Fu has opened the doors that are closed to others. Martial arts is a discipline that serves to guide a person. It is an education, a firm point. A person who practices any art like music, painting, singing, and certain martial arts commits his personality, commits his character, commits his emotional sphere, commits his body and his energies. The training rules are very important. It is essential that a methodology exists and is followed by a program dedicated to clearly obtaining a result. Kung Fu is an art that can be practiced even at old age, even at an old age. It is one of the few martial arts that can be practiced when you're 80 or 90 years old. It is essential to confront combat, but confront it in the gymnasium, in the training and studying phases, just at the right moment and with its natural progression under the guidance of a good master. The arts of war are above all combat arts. But as the saying goes, everything must search for itself in its opposite. Peace is not the opposite of war. The opposite of Eris, war, is Eros, love. The universal attraction force Eros is in Greek mythology the daughter of chaos and the sister of her opposite and complementary Eris, war, symbol of repulsion forces. The warriors have cultivated in all traditions the consciousness of their finitude. This closeness of death transformed their consciousness and allowed them a deeper comprehension of the wonders of life. Also in Hindu tradition, the forces light and darkness confront each other in the cosmic dance of life and death. Sri Dinesh has worked all his life on the path of the warrior, starting from the Hindu tradition. His experience, however, is and has been of great use to the practitioners of other styles. The inwardness of the movement, the flexibility and the breathing control given by yoga make its practice an ideal complement for the most famous fighters of the moment, such as Rix and Gracie. Yoga as a discipline was created about 5,000 years ago.
Presque 5,000 ans. Et fouilles de Mohenjo-Daro nous trouvé.
In the Mohenjo-Daro excavation, they found very important remains, stamps, in which the human body had been engraved, indicating the different energetic circulation points, showing how this internal and invisible circulation maintains our body and its anatomic and physiological performance. Concentration is essential in the practice of martial arts. It is a strong point because without mental concentration we cannot work with maximum intensity. We are not able to use all the natural forces and their dynamic processes. Particularly when we have to send energy to a fixed point by means of the body movement with an impulse that must be extremely precise, balanced, and intense. It will be impossible without the use of concentration. In my experience, the concentration is not only mental, there is also an emotional concentration, deep, which is developed by the practice of martial arts. Yoga is part of the training routine of an increasingly larger number of martial artists. It not only gives them wonderful flexibility, but also helps them to avoid injuries. Yoga, stretch, and effort exercises contribute to shaping longer muscle fibers that, in turn, generate a greater explosive power in the impact techniques and undoubtedly a greater resistance to strain. Yoga is also a meditation form that accelerates the functions, allowing a higher concentration power in situations of maximum stress, such as combat. Isabel Murillo is the head of one of the most important European yoga centers, where the work of this ancient training has been stripped of any kind of oriental vestige, turned into an activity familiar to any Western person. There are more people every day looking for an exercise that gives them health and serenity. Lately, many martial artists are finding yoga as an efficient training method. After all, yoga and martial arts are traditional Oriental arts, and just like karate or Aikido, they also exercise discipline and self-control. But the disciplinary arts are necessarily a confrontation with the fact of violence. However, the people who practice them are generally specifically calm individuals. In the first place, the relationship of psychotherapy with martial arts is the constant use of the body and mind for our personal growth. The on-guard position isn't there just by chance. From the psychological point of view, it has a function. It has the function of feeling that we are supported on the earth. We feel our feet, the floor. We're able to stabilize ourselves, and therefore we can establish ourselves in reality. In second place, martial arts teach us to look at what we have in front of us, at our adversary. The adversary, the other one, is present in martial arts confrontation as well as in life's confrontations. This experience enables us to relate to everything the adversary means. To practice martial arts consists in being able to execute the techniques using not only the arms, feet and elbows, but using our whole being in each act. We live on a planet with an evolution that is characterized by permanent clash among the different species that structure the biomass of the planet. And the intention of each species is to transform into specific proteins of its own species most of the other proteins. In other words, all, in some way, try to devour the other, in a sense that there are no energies used corresponding to flows of natural aggressive and violent energies. They transform into pathological energies, aggressiveness, and pathological violence. Martial arts have the advantage, when correctly practiced, of allowing a flow in the here and now, at the present moment, between the physical energies, the emotional energies, the mental energies, and the attitude with regard to existence. This, in some way, allows the channeling of the extra aggressive energies and aggressive tensions, which otherwise would torture the individual personality, making his life quite unbearable. The body and its gestures are one of the tools by means of which we know the enemy. What Bruce Lee called the telegraphic movement gives us some action guides. An enemy who yells before beginning to fight is liberating his frustration and demonstrating the anger and fear produced by the anxiety created by the decision to start the attack or to leave. When the adversary stops talking, bends his knees and closes his hands, he is indicating that he adopts, like a feline, an attack position. Now he is ready to go. He has overcome his doubts and his attacks is imminent and can be lethal. The military arts, far from the original concept of Oriental tradition, have used and use nowadays martial techniques for their instructions. In spite of the sophistication of technological weapons, the army will always exist as long as somebody has to occupy the conquered territory. For this reason, the commando training includes attack and defense techniques more sophisticated every day. Juan Hombre, a master of ninjutsu, trains the Spanish armed forces, specifically the parachute brigades. Every day, the law and other forces receive more intensive training in martial arts. Master Barbacel from the Philippines practices the Arnis-Kali-Eskrima obra mano, a style of combat with a stick, which has been of great use to the French police. Jose Cospinara trained the special services of this country of the origin, Cuba, in Kaisen Rio, a lethal style to face armed enemies. Thierry Delieff also trains the French Security Corps in the use of the tamfa, a weapon from Okinawa that has become a must to the police of all the world and in which the Chilean Raúl Gutiérrez has instructed hundreds of specialists in security in Spain and South America. It is in the training of the bodyguards where the martial arts are creating jobs for the experts who trained for years in self-defense techniques. However, in this case, one does not protect oneself, so the techniques must change in nature. One hand protects the body or the VIP, while the other aims a weapon at the attackers. Okinawa was undoubtedly one of the key sites in the development of disciplinary arts. Even nowadays, the old masters teach the old techniques and katas, in which farm tools are used as weapons. Okinawa suffered throughout its history countless of invasions. The last one came from the Japanese Empire and took place in spite of the warrior character of the inhabitants of the Ryukyu archipelago. Weapons prohibitions reached the point of having one single knife tied in the center of the plaza, so that women could cut their vegetables there. However, the people's instinct and ability enabled them to design a complete combat system based on their farm tools. But it was in the empty-handed arts where Okinawa made its greatest contribution to the history of the planet's martial arts. The empty-handed techniques, karate, were turned into a system by the great master Guchin Funakoshi. However, its origin seems to be clearly influenced by the Chinese boxing techniques that some experts imported and transformed in the islands and that are known as Okinawa Te or Okinawa's Fist. But whatever its origin, the truth is that with its new system, karate conquered the world during the 50s and 60s. Every martial art was then a form of karate, and it extended all around the world. Karate furnishes an effective defensive system, a balanced and complete physical training, and a way to find oneself, a meditation in movement. Master Hwa Rang, who is 96 years old, still teaches and practices an art that has kept him in top form. In July 1915, in the Taisho period, I began studying with great master Jojo Motobo. I was then an impetuous young man who wanted to be stronger. That is why I asked the great master to initiate me in the art. I thought it was something easy to learn. I executed the techniques full of enthusiasm and dedication, looking for my master's approval of my work. It didn't take me long to understand that it was much more difficult than I had thought, and it required time, sacrifice, and plenty of dedication. When I turned 20, I began the hardest part of my training. It was supposed to be done during the winter period. I did the exercises on the beach. I submerged myself in the water up to my neck. The waves beat at me, so my posture had to be firm. The salty water frequently got into my mouth, and the cold water nipped my body. I did this test 3 times a week. It was dangerous to do it daily because the circulation system could be badly affected. These trainings were carried out during the months of November, December, January, and sometimes even in February. At the beginning, before starting, I covered my neck with a kind of a scarf. The great master scolded me and told me I should train with more seriousness and dedication. So I corrected my mistake. I took off the scarf before going into the water. My wish is to continue training my pupils until I am 100 years old, or while I am capable of walking on my own. I want to transmit all my legacy, all of my master's legacy, to the future generations. If I don't do it, my master, when I get to the other world, will undoubtedly punish me. But Japan, as well as China, have been generous with its contribution to the styles of combat. The Japanese executive discharged the aggressiveness training in Kendo. Even in the West, this beautiful martial art is daily gaining in popularity. Its techniques are simple. Punch up to down, from right to left, from left to right, brick, that's it. It isn't complicated. What is magical is its execution. To choose the right moment, act with the necessary determination, interrupt the opponent's chain movement, to break down his barriers, all to acquire that contemplative state that allows you to perceive the opponent's intent and get ahead of him. That in Japan is called sen no sen. Kendo shares with Iaido the concept of the sword as a weapon. In Iaido, the art of taking the sword out of the sheath at the same time cutting a real sword is used. The Japanese katana, famous for its lightness and strength, is forged with different types of steel. The softer ones in the middle give the weapon its flexibility, while the harder on the border gives its cutting capacity. Iaido requires maximum concentration. Each movement has the purpose and strength of a mortal blow. It is so much so that even in training, the samurai, before putting the sword away, shakes it to get rid of the enemy's blood. It is from these Japanese traditional arts known as Bujutsu, in which one of the greatest masters of recent Japanese history immersed himself. Morihei Ueshiba was a special and charismatic person. He studied in the traditional schools of the path of the warrior, such as Daito Ryo, the Japanese animist tradition of the Shinto from the Omoto sect, and created Aikido, the path where the energies unite. Ueshiba's theory was to go one step further than that of Jigoro Kano. I not only yield when I push, but I pull. The result is a combat art crowned by excellence. There is no attack or defense, only a fusion with the opponent. There is no enemy, only the meeting of two forces, an encounter which we follow to its last consequences instead of opposing it. However, it was many years after his creation that this martial art acquired special importance. The appearance on the scene of Steven Seagal marked the boom of its practice, and it became tremendously popular. Seagal married a Japanese woman and found in Tokyo the first Aikido gym managed by a Westerner. Mijako Fujitani had 2 children with Seagal, and during many years she shared her knowledge with the famous actor. In fact, Fujitani had a higher degree than him when they met. She was what they call in Japan a senpai, his older sister. Most of the lines of work in Aikido, especially those involved with the Aikikai, the central office in Japan, prefer maintaining a line of work joined to the direct teaching of the creator of the style. Yoshimitsu Yamada stands out among these masters. He's a tireless traveler who teaches the art of his master Wishiba in all latitudes. Some of his outstanding pupils come from the Aikikai in New York, and they practice a dynamic type of Aikido, a powerful Aikido closer to the style Wishiba taught when he was young than he practiced when he was old. Aikido is above all a beautiful art of graceful movement that reminds us of the dance of the Sufis or the flamenco worlds. But don't be mistaken, behind that lovely exterior, there are movements of lethal consequences. Each technique attacks numerous points of our opponent's body, being capable of putting him out of place, breaking or injuring many bones and joints. However, Wishiba considered his Budo essentially an art of peace. His obsession in this sense even took him to China when it was at war with Japan in order to stop the fight. With him, the combat art of traditional Japan reached their peak as arts for times of peace. The path of the warrior was then what has always been, a path of consciousness, a path of oneness, a path of inner growth. Flow like the water, glide like a cloud. This Zen phrase defines perfectly the goal of all martial arts at their highest level. To become one with the whole, merge body, emotion, and mind in a thrifty act, impeccable, fully lived in the here and now. This is the life of a warrior, a path that began in the dawn of humanity and has been distilled into cultural forms, each time more sophisticated and varied, through a universe of styles that have explored and are exploring all of human beings' possibilities. A path to learn how to change some of the pains inherited in life simply by personal effort. A path of health, harmony, power. A treasure of tradition always open to the future.